Hello, Kenny. Welcome.
Hey, Rabbi Bernath, how are you?
Oh, what an amazing day for episode 5.
Five. I
Right
can't
before
believe it.
Pesach.
I'll say that some people, it meant a lot to me. A few people reached out because this is the longest we ever went between episodes. And it wasn't that long, but it was a little over a week, I think.
Hmm.
We were both so busy last week. But people were like, when's the next episode going to drop? And that made me feel good.
Yeah, really.
People were missing it.
I ended up, the day that we usually record is usually Tuesday or Wednesday, and I ended up in Portland, Maine, doing a wine tasting. The first ever kosher Israeli wine tasting in Portland, Maine.
It's unbelievable. I, of course, am an avid follower of your social media. So I saw that. Also, after you didn't respond to me right away, which you normally do, and I know you do that probably for most people, I took to check out where you were holding, and I saw that. That's unbelievable. You know also that I'm into old shuls, and that looked like a really cool experience you had there.
That I think, I mean, obviously not talking about the wine, but that is an amazing idea for small communities that are having trouble with their shoals, where they turned it into a museum. And it's a museum during the week, and it's a shul on Shabbos, and it really is great for this small community.
Oh, that's interesting. I heard you talk about it, but I didn't hear you mention that it was a shul still. I thought it was just a museum.
No, they totally they
Oh, so
shul they redid it so that the shul is totally intact the way it's been for over 100 years, and
wow,
it's still an active shul. And then they have a museum curator, like it's a serious museum.
right.
And what I realize is they're getting a lot of those cruises that are coming to the Portland harbor. And you know how Jews are on cruises, and they're always like, "Oh, what's going on for the Jews here?" Right?
Sure, sure.
So I
That's so
think that
cool.
yeah,
We have Baltimore has the original shul from 1830 or so. Is today. It was saved in the 60s. It was very close to being torn down, and it's been the Jewish Museum of Maryland for years since then. But it happens to be, and that's a part of town that no Jews live anymore. It's all the way downtown next to the harbor, because they say, when the Jews came to America, they got off the boat and started a shul, because that's you see in a lot of the towns, certainly on the
it's
East Coast, is that shuls were right next to the water. They're on that street where that Jewish museum is. There's an existing current shul that's it's I think the longest running, like from it where it founded. It's well over 100 years old. So, and both really beautiful places. But that's really interesting. I was really fascinated by that, and I didn't realize that was an existing shul. I thought it was just an old shul that they turned into a museum and salvaged. But that is a good idea. You're right.
yeah. One of my favorite parts is when you look out the front door of the shul, you see the water. It's literally beeline to the coast, which, like you said, is amazing. But then looking from the shul out onto the water, that was really amazing. In any case, most of the people that were there had never tasted Israeli or kosher wine, and it was amazing to be able to
Right.
showcase.
Right.
And again, you always get the, "Oh, I thought kosher wine was Manischewitz,"
Right.
and
Right.
be able to
Yeah.
change that.
It's cool to be able to open people's eyes like you did. So that's amazing. I was fascinated by your journey. I think every week you have a cool story. I don't have my stories aren't as interesting. My stories aren't as interesting.
And the drive there, the mountains, going through the White Mountains in New Hampshire. I mean, it's an amazing
Right. Well,
place, and just the geography in the U.S. there,
yeah.
just really special.
I have never been in Maine. I have never been there. How far is that for you to drive?
7.5 hours.
That must be a really beautiful drive.
And it's a beautiful drive. And I
Yeah.
think it's longer than it could be because you're going through the mountains, and it's just picturesque, and the sense of awe and wonder that you experience when driving there is just
That's
really amazing.
really beautiful. And I'm sure it was amazing to. You probably had a lot of people that, like you said, have never experienced, let alone Israeli wines, but kosher wines, and that's what we are trying to do, right? To
Yeah.
turn people on to these things. So,
And I'm usually
um,
used to Jewish audiences that don't listen to anything, and these people were listening and they were asking questions, really
yeah,
good questions.
yeah,
So that was really special. One of the things I've been thinking about uh, coming to Pesach is
Is that coming up soon?
Yeah, 9 days.
Oh, yes. It's funny you mention
Oh,
it.
actually, it's a week from tomorrow night.
That's right. I was like, it's less than 9 days.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, it's a stressful time of year at this point, but it's also an exciting time of year. Pesach and the Pesach Sedarim are probably Pesach's my favorite Yontif, and the Sedarim themselves are my favorite nights of the year. I would do three of them, honestly. forget
really.
to, forget to. I love it. I love every bit of it. It's kind of everything I love about Judaism rolled into one event, and it's so family oriented, which makes it the most special. And um, it's well known if you eat over my house for a Shabbos meal, forget the Seder that I like take you hostage. You're not leaving my house. Like that's you're here for the long haul until Shabbos ends. Like you will hear Havdalah at the end of the day.
And
So
we will open a bottle.
that's right. Well, the wine, no one ever complains about the wine. Me, they may complain about, but the wine is always going to be top notch. But
So
yeah,
the number one question I get this time of year is,
yes.
what are your recommendations for the Seder? I believe majority of kosher wine is bought and sold during this time of year. I don't know what the numbers are exactly. I once heard more than 50% of kosher wine is bought and sold this time of year.
I think the month of Purim and Pesach, it's for sure 50%, if not well more, and that when you include Purim for sure.
Right.
Pesach maybe 50%,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a wine holiday, and not only because it's featured as we've spoken about, it's a really core part of the Seder, but also because other drinks that some people enjoy are not necessarily able to drink on Pesach. So it's a real wine lovers holiday because you can't drink your scotch and bourbons and beers and those kind of things as much. There are some kosher beers made out of random things, but for the most part, you can't
I'm
drink that
always
stuff.
surprised at year after year where you have various alcohols outside of wine that seem to be popping up on the
Right,
kosher for Passover market.
right. Which just goes to show that what we like and enjoy means something to someone. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's some
No,
real
it's
top-notch
because,
cognacs and
yeah,
you
exactly.
know. But yeah, so that is the same. I get the same question every single year. What do you plan to drink? What do you suggest drinking? So what's your thought off the top of your head? Like, what is your answer? I guess when people ask you that, and I would say make that how they call like the elevator pitch thing. Like make it one sentence. First, what's your initial answer to people?
I go to my cellar the morning before the Seder or the afternoon before the Seder and I see what's good. That's
I
my
do the
answer.
I do the same thing. I have so many friends that like they like spend weeks thinking about. I really don't do that. I really go down that day, but I every single year I hear the same back and forth argument amongst at least wine nerds about what to drink on Pesach and what to drink at the Sidarim, and I feel like I'm always a contrarian with it because as you imagine, and I think you and I have even discussed to some degree, is that most people, because of the halachas involved in the four cups, and I'll let the rabbi speak more about that. You have to drink a fair amount of alcohol pretty fast,
Right.
um, and so the standard suggestion is light-bodied wines, very light-bodied wines. A lot of people nowadays even drink rosé because as you can also speak about, it should be red and not white, and you could talk about why. But would you concur with that idea of drinking a light-bodied wine?
Well, what I don't want is if you're a lightweight, which many people are without even realizing that, and you're going to drink that much alcohol. What is it? Minimum each glass of the four glasses are supposed to be 3.5 ounces. So you're supposed to have 3.5 ounces. If you're going to be drinking that on an empty stomach for kiddush, and then you're going to sit down to your seder, you're going to already be buzzing. That's not an enjoyable experience to start buzzing through the seder.
Hard disagree. Maybe that's why I enjoy this arm so much. No, you're right, and that's for sure the answer for the vast majority of people. Happens to be when I was studying halachas of this stuff, it's absolutely acceptable to drink between the first and second coasts and between the second and third coasts, just not between the third and fourth, of course. right?
I don't
Am I
think it's
correct?
drinking in between, as long as you separate the 4 glasses.
Right. Separate the 4 glasses, or at
And
least accomplish what you need to for each glass, right? And
absolutely.
finish. Right.
So, I
How
mean,
about?
what I always recommend is have a 4 ounce glass that you use as your glass. So that
I was
way,
just gonna. I was just gonna ask you that. What
yeah,
glass do you use for? So you have a specific one of those.
there's
Um,
actually a child's glass. It's a French glass that I
interesting.
found that's made for teaching children how to drink from glass. And it's exactly 4 ounces. It's a really hard glass. And I forgot the name of it
I,
offhand.
right. I know that glass, and I thought that I always thought that was a specific like a type of cocktail glass, or. But that's interesting. I didn't know that was geared towards children learning to drink. But so that's what you personally do. You use a 4 ounce glass.
Yeah, I use a 4 ounce glass. Obviously, I mean, I know there's a lot of people who are more religious that are going to drink out of silver. I can never drink wine out of silver. I'm sorry.
No, yeah.
Yeah, that's just not going to work, or stainless steel or anything like that. So I found that glass.
I didn't even know that that was a thing. So silver based on what? Because it's more hush of thing.
Exactly. People, well,
Yeah.
also because they sell the silver Kiddush cups.
Right. Right. Of course. Yeah, and a lot of people, of course, it's not that complicated to kosher your actual Kiddush cup for Pesach.
Right.
I've actually never done that. I've always used glass. I grew up using glass, so we always had that. So I've never even thought alternatively of using it different. And I agree with you. Drinking wine out of silver or any kind of metal I think it gives it a different taste, a bad
Absolutely.
taste.
Absolutely. Especially if you're going to have more subtle grapes, like if you're going to have a Pinot or something like that, which is going to be a finer grape.
So, talk to me about why do we use red wine and not white wine? Why is it preferable, I should say?
Why is it preferable to use red wine? So there is the actual tradition that starts off with looking after red wine, a wine when it's red. But it says in the Code of Jewish Law, actually, that we should seek to use red wine for our Seder, for Shabbat as well. But one of the interesting things, and what I love so much about Jewish law, is it always takes into effect, especially in the Ashkenazi community, persecution. And we have been in places all over the world, and we have been persecuted. And for centuries, the Jewish community lived under the Christian rule, and people would actually avoid red wine at the Seder because they were worried about hate mongers,
Right.
and they used
Well,
to
and the fact that it was tied to pogroms, that idea of red and
the,
blood, and
the
right,
blood libels,
right,
which were often because of they would use those blood libels, which somehow in the Muslim world popped up in the past couple of years as well. Uh, and that the Jews were using the Christian blood, and now people say Muslim blood for their matzah, which is absolutely insane that anyone would ever think that. But that really became a huge issue for the Jewish community
right,
to the point where they would avoid red wine.
right.
Also,
But yet we still use it nowadays.
well, it's still considered a preferred wine, and there are people who have a tradition not only red wine but non-mavushal wine.
Right. I was going to bring that up also. That's because I get asked that, and you know what you get asked also is that people that buy I think a lot of people don't know this, or at least have put it together, but I think it's the Kedem Concord or one of those like jugs, the big jug of Kedem.
Right. So
The one that's in glass is non-mavushal.
what Kedem does is the 1.5 liter
Right.
is non-mavushal, and their
Correct.
750 milliliters is mavushal. So they
Correct.
made it really
That's what it
easy
is.
to differentiate.
Right. And I think specifically for use in these types of situations where people don't want to use mavushal wine.
Right.
And what's the idea of not using mavushal? Why are people have an issue with using mavushal wine?
So the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, says that the issue that you should not use wine for Kiddush or for the Seder that you wouldn't put as a libation on the altar, and so mavushal wine would not be able to be used on the altar during the temple period, and so that's the main reason why.
Okay. What about people? Because I get this question all the time. what would you suggest to people that say they're allergic to wine or allergic to sulfites or allergic to alcohol or really can't drink wine?
So you and I both know that all grapes have sulfites. You can't get away
Right.
from sulfites with grapes. People say, "Oh, is there such a thing as a non-sulfite wine?" It would have to be not be made from grapes, which
Correct.
wouldn't make it wine.
Correct.
But there are wines that don't have added sulfites.
Right.
So
Right.
definitely,
Sulfites, of course, are used to help control the wine, and they have. That's why some people have gotten into these like natural wines and things like that because they think they're going to avoid some of these things. But yes, I've told so many people this. If you, and also, the easiest way to tell if you are allergic to sulfites if you have trouble with dried fruits, which have way more sulfites in them than wines do. And
exactly.
people are like, no, I can eat dry fruits. I'm like, then you're not allergic to sulfites. And like
Right.
deli and things of that nature. They're allergic. They're not even allergic, but the alcohol is what's giving them a problem usually.
Right.
Which is why they're actually they've become hard to find. There are a few low alcohol dry red wines made. You familiar with the ones I'm talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
You can find them. People,
Nature screaming.
is that one of them?
Yeah.
Oh, that's at Zakon, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's another one also, which is actually like pretty decent. Not that one, I would say, but um, there was another one. But they're hard to find. I would think they actually should probably be a few more of them because around Pesach time, people really look for those specifically for this reason. Because you're so, what types of wines do you suggest for people that are lighter?
So you and
Or
I have spoken about this before that mostly Jews go for cabs.
Mhm.
I think if you're gonna want to enjoy your evening and you're gonna be drinking that much wine, which I mean you're talking about minimum of about 14 ounces of wine. It's a nice amount of wine throughout the evening. Well, definitely you want to mix it up, but I wouldn't go for cabs. I would go for lighter grapes. So I know that traditionally it's really hard to get the kosher consumer out off of sweets and wines, which means they're wines that are grapes but also have a lot of sugar in them. There actually is one, just a kedem. It's called the matuk kal that does
Right,
not have added sugar. It's actually
right,
naturally sweet, which is already a much better than some of these other cream malagas and others that are full of sugar, probably more sugar than Coke.
right. Um, I I like the so maybe a Pinot Noir, a lighter, like a
Yeah,
already naturally lighter, bodied type of wine. Um,
even a Zinfandel.
Zinfandel, really, I find
Yeah,
that to be the opposite. I find them to be really heavy, but I guess there are some that are really light also.
there's a lot of
There aren't that many Zinfandels to start with that are.
right,
There really aren't that
or
many.
Petit Syrah.
Yeah. But the idea, yeah, to look for some of these like lighter bodied red wines. I've I've even and like I said, I think I mentioned earlier that I think a lot of people are drinking rosé. I personally don't. So I'm going to get into why I disagree with most of this. I'm not even agreeing with what I'm telling you right now with the lighter bodied wines. Is that at least for that first kiddush, I find when I sit down to the Seder and like you know what it takes to get to that point.
Absolutely.
Um, and I know if there are any ladies listening to this, I do plenty of that work myself. So I'm not just like sitting down and we both work hard in this house. I'm a Renaissance man. But you
Should
sit
we
down
applaud
and
you?
it's what's sorry.
Should we applaud you?
You can add that in post edit. Um, and you sit down and besides that, like I said, it's so family oriented and it is the holiday of freedom. And you sit down and I look around my Seder table and my family's there, thank God. And sometimes we have friends there and others. And you say, one of the first brachas you say is Shehechianu, right? And I've kind of come to the conclusion many years ago that if I am making that blessing, which is thank you Hashem for bringing me to this point, that I'm not doing that over some $10 throwaway wine just to be able to get through it. I'm going to use one of the best bottles I have for that. I feel like that's appropriate for that. And now, granted, you have to kind of gulp that at least that revius, right? You have to kind of gulp that. And that's not so clear cut, or is it that you have to gulp that right away?
I mean,
You're
according
supposed
to
to.
most opinions, you should at least majority of your glass. you should take down in
Right.
one gulp.
So what I do is I do that, and fine, maybe I'm not appreciating that first gulp of it, but the following, and I'll sip at it afterwards. And I just, to me, that's what do I have all this wine I have for, and why do I care about it that much if I'm going to make a beautiful bracha like that on some, wine that I don't even want to think about? It just doesn't seem right to me. It's like, you work so hard to find an esrog that's so beautiful and so perfect. I kind of think the same way of this. That's you're making a bracha on this wine and thanking Hashem for bringing you to this time and making a gafen on a night celebrating our freedom. And you're going to use, that's kind of my thoughts on that.
You've really inspired me. I agree with you. Like, if you think about it in that context for the different holidays and the etrog and how much money we spend on that, or even the shmura matzah. Have you seen the prices of shmura matzah?
That's yes.
If we're spending so much money on the matzah, and the wine is a pivotal component of the Pesach experience.
That's right. And it somehow every year when I talk to people that are the biggest wine snobs, when it comes to Pesach, they drink the worst wine at the Seder. Like it boggles my mind. I'm like, you almost like this is your passion. And then when you apply it to, Judaism is our life, and you apply it to the ideas and the philosophies behind Pesach, I'm like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. It seems opposite of what you want to do.
I have a practical issue, is that our Seder, thank God, is usually around 100 people or more. And
right.
So it's just a practical issue, but I agree with you. If you're having a small Seder with your family, then definitely you have converted me. I think
right.
that, especially for that first glass, I don't know about the following glasses, but at least for the first glass that ends up kind of lingering through Magid.
Sure.
Like as you're reading the Haggadah, you're still nursing that glass.
100%. Right. So you're saying you can't have your own special bottle without sharing wealth, so to speak. I mean, you can, but
yeah. I mean, thank God. What
would I do if I were you? I would. I'd be like, it's a rabbi's fund.
Yes. But we do really live. Whoever's hungry, let them come and eat. And we have a lot of people that join us who have nowhere else to go.
That's what it's about.
We're really honored to be able to do that and be part of that. And so it's always hard where I get a decent wine and I make sure that there's decent wine on the table, but I'm somewhat limited with having the best of the best of the best.
That makes sense. But you haven't converted me because will be with my family this year. We're going to be away, so I don't really even have necessarily the ability to have really others, but we will have others at certain meals. I know, I've heard, but anyway, that is the right thing to do. And I've done that when I was at home for sure. There's something really special about really having people that I not even necessarily don't have other places to go, but maybe most comfortable in your home. And I know in your home, that's the case. So that's a special thing, and it's a special night to do that. It's really what it's about.
I think that there's always this conversation. There was a conversation after the Holocaust, and now this year, while Israel's in war, it was a conversation about leaving a chair empty at the table for the hostages and for the fallen soldiers. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe was really against that. He said, don't leave the chair empty, fill it with somebody who needs a Seder.
Love it. So true.
Yeah, and I think that's so. And we all have people that we know who could use a Seder, and they won't have another Seder to go to if we don't invite them.
100%. 100%. And I think it's sometimes hard to get outside of your comfort zone and ask people, or you may think it's going to be weird, but the night to do it is that night or those nights, and the reward you get is so great to include people and make them feel welcome and at home. So it's absolutely.
So now that you've converted me, hypothetically, well, with the second night, we always have a more intimate Seder. So I'm thinking that you've converted me for the second night.
There you go. Okay.
What are you drinking? Like, what kind of wine generally in the past have you had that is, you say, this is the one that I want to nurse through Magid?
So we that idea that we spoke about last time with the Moshiach wine thing, that's what I pull out at least one of those. I go down to my cellar this year. I won't be home, but I've already, of course, planned that. I don't even know if my wife has a plane ticket, but I know that there will be wine at my Seder. um, no, she has a ticket. I need her there. But I go down to my cellar on the years where I'm home, and that's the first thing I look for is like, what special bottle am I going to pull out this year? That could be anything. I have that could kind of be all over the place. I have Baruch Hashem, like a fair amount of special bottles. This year, I certainly would have. I have like a very old Shiloh that maybe I would have pulled out. I have an old Barkan. I would have pulled out an old Israeli. And like we both spoke about, my intent this year for sure, as it is most years, at least recently, is to drink Israeli wines at the Seder. I love the wines that I think I would. I love this year. Like I like Wittgen's wines. I think they're really like very Seder appropriate. Besides being Israeli, of course, but I think they're a little more like old world, as we like to say. They're a little lighter. They're not that really ripe Israeli fruit, which we find, makes sense because it's a hot climate, so you're going to have ripe grapes. But it's also kind of shifted towards the more common palate that prefers these kind of wines. But Wittgen, he does things his own way in that regard, and he also doesn't use necessarily it's not all cab. So I think maybe like a Wittgen Petit Syrah, like you mentioned, one of those Wittgens. I think I would,
or one of his blends, like the Shorashim.
Yeah.
Those are really great wines.
Right. But they're I think they check off a lot of boxes in that regard. But I haven't thought about it specifically yet, but that would be that pops into my head as a wine that I would even use for the Four Kosos, with having also that kind of the Shulchan Aruch wine, I would probably make Kiddush on that, like I said, and then switch to maybe something a little lighter. But again, although that's light, it's not low quality. It's very, very, very good quality and very good wine. So I think, what about you?
I'm thinking, as you're talking, that we are focusing on Israeli wine this year, and everyone is thinking about making sure there's a bottle of Israeli wine on the table. And let's talk about the window, because you and I both know that Israeli wines have a more shallow window than other regions. And I think that if you're going down to your cellar, I mean, outside of 2008, 2015, there were Shemitah years. So, I mean, if you do have, and you hold Bayot or Bezdin and you have a Shemitah wine, Seder is probably a really good time to open it. Though you have to remember, if you open that wine, you got to drink it to the last drop.
Right. Well, the joke I always make is that's never a problem.
Yes. But what if I sometimes think, well, what if the wine is corked or it goes off, and then you're in trouble, and you have to still drink it to the last drop.
I've considered that. It's never happened to me. I do have some here, just randomly. You know what I have? I think still I have a 2008 Yarden Blanc de Blanc. The sparkling wine. I think I'm still sitting on one or two of them down there, and those, of course, age beautifully because they age like champagne ages, and they're made in the champagne method. And a lot of people believe that they are, basically every bit as good as most of the top kosher, French champagnes, at much less cost. They're not as cheap as they used to be, of course. I used to buy those for $20-$25. Now they're like 40, 45, 50. So you can drop down to the next rung. They make the Gilgal, also is made by Golan Heights Winery. And that sparkling wine is fantastic. I think perennially, it's never a vintage. As far as I can think, it doesn't even say a vintage on it. It's a blend of years, probably. It's non-vintage. But when I say perennially, I mean year in and year out. When you buy that, it's just always a winner, and it drinks like things 4, 5, 10 times as expensive. I think that's a great idea. Obviously,
outside of the red wine issue.
Yeah. Now what would you do with that? You always could really, kind of just mix it with a little red wine, can't you?
You could put a little grape juice in it.
Or even grape juice.
I mean, some people are like, "No, you can't do that. That's wrong. It's not red." But why not? It's just the color red. It's no
Right.
problem.
Right. So a friend of mine asked me this week, he was asking me, I think it must have been some Gemara he was learning. And he asked me historically why wine used to have to be watered down. And I explained to him that, that wine was really made, not even just old fashioned. It was basically just like they left grape juice to basically rot. And that was just like a muck. It was like a syrup. So they had to make it even palatable. They had to add water to it.
Right.
Wherein the other way, what it ended up becoming, especially in France and modern history, is that France and places like Italy, they had to make laws that it had to have enough, that it had to be strong enough. It had to reach 12.5, 13%, things like that, to even be strong enough to be considered to be able to put the name of the town or whatever on it. Like they had rules like that. It went the other way to some degree. Now we get to Israel. And certain places in California, and this is to get back to what we were speaking to before, where, some of these wines are really big and they're 15 and a half. You even see sometimes 16% alcohol,
Insane.
real beast wines. And you and I both know that happens because of the climate. It's very hard to pick the grapes early enough that they're not going to be to that point of alcohol or sugar really, and then turn into that amount of alcohol with, while retaining the attributes you want. So it's tough in hot places and you end up with these really big wines. Now, the best winemakers are able to take those and you can have a 15% or 15.5% by alcohol wine. And it doesn't taste like that. That's great winemaking.
Right.
But that's not always.
A lot of the Israeli winemakers are making those Bordeaux style blends.
Right.
With some of those really, there's some vintages it's very hot, summer's really hot, and they end up with, like you said, the strong sugar and very alcoholic grapes. What about these pet nuts? I just got one from Bat Shlomo, and it was amazing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So I had the Dalton one at the one of the recent wine tastings. I love that style personally. I hear all these people like rah, rah, and complaining about it. To me, it's not as much a wine experience as it is somewhat more like a beer experience, and you have to think of it that way. And I think it's a really interesting and tasty drink. It's like I love trying new things, and I think that's an interesting style. What that is, of course, is that it's just a single fermentation, and it's like basically they stop the winemaking process in the middle. So it's almost like, half of the wine.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a more natural style if you want to think it that way. And that's all the rage lately is natural styles. But I think a lot of winemakers just want to experiment. And that's why you see all kinds of different things now, orange wines and all these different things. I love those pet nats personally. I don't think I'd pay. Some of them are $30, $40. I think that's very expensive.
That Dalton pet nat that we tasted at the wine tasting not long ago, that would be a great, let's say, third glass for a Seder.
It's not a bad idea at all. Yeah, it's kind of got. I love bubbles. I would drink bubbles for every glass, but I think a lot of people might find that to be too much, especially when you have to drink it that way. Even think about a glass of seltzer. Try drinking that straight. It's hard to do.
Right. Good point.
But I agree. I don't have a problem with that, and I think that's maybe something I would do this year. I kind of like that idea.
Yeah. So, but back to the window, I was thinking that outside of 2008, 2015, that if you have any wines, I would say in between those years from Israel, unless it's a fantastic, like we both said, we can count on one hand how many wines fit that category. I would say if they're sitting in your cellar, probably a good time to open them.
I wouldn't even put that window at 2008 to 2015. I would put that at 2015 and 2022.
I know. I was trying to be nice. Yeah.
There's not that many Israeli wines, not really that many that go past 10 years. I'd say even a lot of the really good ones, it's not, and that's not a fault of the winemaker generally as much as it is climate. It's just those wines are not built.
The vines are young.
Yeah. It's, and The reality is that I think people love to think of that whole idea of wine cellars and aging wine and whatever, but 99% of wine, I mean, that's not necessarily 99%, but a vast, vast majority of wine are meant to be consumed when you buy it. That's
And
when it's, and you speak to any winemaker there, they will say any wine is meant to drink that way. Like even ones that that are really, you should be putting away for 10 years or 20 years. The winemaker will tell you ready to drink now. But
I just opened the Veneto that was a 21. I'm like, this has 10 years. Like you can't even drink it now. It was unapproachable.
which wine was it?
It was the Desto Veneto,
Desto
2022.
Veneto.
Yeah, it was completely unapproachable.
Right. So that happens, and you know enough to know that. But the vast majority of wines are meant to be consumed immediately. So yeah, with Israeli wines, yeah, if you have an Israeli wine that's already, let's say a 2000, it's 24 now, so like 14, 15, and even the ones that are built to last, let's say you have like a Flam Cab, those 2015 is an ideal time to drink it now. I mean, it's not going to get better than that. And the reality is something else that we, I think, touched on once, is that there's two things with aging wine. And the vast majority of wines, you can age them, but they're not going to necessarily get better. They may hold for a long time, and the wine may soften a little, and some of the things that become a little more pleasant about wine, but they're not necessarily going to ever really evolve. And that's, I think, almost always the case with Israeli wines. And again, that's not a criticism per se.
There are a few unfiltered wines that sometimes will age, but sometimes will get a secondary fermentation also in the bottle because they're unfiltered.
It's not something I want to happen, but yeah,
Right.
that could happen. Yeah, but that's, I would, if you're sitting on some old, higher end, let's say, or really well made Israeli wines, this is a perfect time. Yeah, I would say make that your Shulchan Aruch wine, even if you don't want super heavy wines for your four kosos. You could. That's a, because like I said, I mean, when is a better time, really?
I'll give you an example. I was just looking at my cellar. I think I have a Yarden Ram 09.
Yeah.
Maybe probably now is a good time to drink it.
I wouldn't sit on it.
Yeah.
That could be really special wine. It could be. They made some great wines in that period of time.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that would be. I'm thinking of that one as my Shulchan Aruch wine for the second night.
That sounds like a great idea.
My opening wine, because like you said, you can sit on it, but it now is. I mean, it's or probably even after its drinking window a little bit.
It could be, but that's really like top wine, and I think that you may have a real gem there. I always tell people also like to have a backup wine. You never know, and if it's not great, then you'll have something else. So don't ever expect something that old to be great, but
yeah. But if you're sitting on like an 02 Yarden Merlot or like one of these random Israeli wineries, one of these Carmel, from the early thousands, I would say, it's an opportunity to try. You never know. It could be that it's finished. It could be that it's good, but it could be amazing.
Right. And I think a big part of that, my issue sometimes with opening really special wines is if it's just, my personal family, my wife and I and my kids or something like that, even though my kids dabble in it and they have some, but my wife doesn't care. She loves wine, but she doesn't necessarily care which one it is. So for me, it's an opportunity if you have a big Seder to have other people, especially they don't need to be, wine experts or know that much. Let them experience that. Let them see what an old wine or an old special wine is going to taste like. To me, that's a much better opportunity to open a bottle like that than, when you're just save it all for yourself. It's
and teach them. This is an opportunity, right? Isn't the Seder supposed to be about asking questions and independent thought and teaching? Well, you can also include wine education as part of your Seder experience.
100%. 100%.
So we actually got two questions that came in from, so just in case you don't know this, we haven't said this enough, but kosherwinepodcast@gmail.com is our email. And we got two emails. How exciting is this? We have fan mail.
I love it. I get people, a lot of people obviously know me. They just text me directly. I kind of want them to, call the call-in line. first time caller, long time listener thing?
I didn't
Yeah.
even open them. I'm so excited. I'm going to open the emails live, and let's talk about it.
Let's hear.
The first one is thanks for the first of its kind kosher wine podcast. My brother and I are big wine drinkers and enjoying listening. There's a lot of talk on what the proper temperature to store red wines and the best temperature to serve them at. Can you educate us on what those temperatures are and if it varies on long-term and short-term storing? Also, what is your take on chilling Chardonnay and Rosé before drinking? And should these wines be aired as well if not needed? Thanks in advance, and best wishes for continued Hatzlacha. Ezra Graham.
That was only one question. That seemed like 10 questions.
I know. Okay, so let's talk about temperature.
Sure. Did he say just for red wine? Well, we could talk about everything.
Yeah.
So and that was cellaring or drinking or both? That was both, he asked, right?
I think both.
Okay.
Yeah. No, at least it's to store the red wine. So for cellaring.
Okay. So storage, I mean, the ideal storage for red wine for sure is 55 degrees. I think that's a consensus. For most of us, that's not going to happen. You're either going to need a high-end refrigerator or you live in a cave. But the ideal, like, what do? I don't have high-end refrigerators. And by the way, a regular refrigerator is not good for long-time storage. I think a lot of people think it is. It's far too cold. But some of these fancy wine refrigerators maybe are more ideal. The cheap wine refrigerators, some people would say to avoid because why? Not because of the temperature, but because of the vibration that occurs. In standard refrigerators, the motor starts and stops. And really almost worse than temperature, maybe worse than temperature for wine is vibration.
Yes.
So that's why one of the reasons it's ideal to keep it in your cellar. And for sure, if you have a real cellar, that's ideal. But even downstairs, that's kind of underground, like mine is. The idea also is not just the coolness and the darkness, but it's also the vibration because you're on that foundation floor. Like think about if you're on your main floor, how much that floor shakes. That's terrible for one. But basically, unless you're really storing wine long term, and most wine should not be, you don't have to overthink it. You keep the bottle on its side at a cool, dark temperature, at a cool temperature that's also dark. That's what you're going to be fine with that if you're keeping it for a year, 2 years max, But for the longer term, for your special bottles, yeah, the main thing is 55 degrees, dark, main thing, and no vibration. I think I covered it.
And I would also add temperature fluctuation. It's a big deal. Like if you can decide where you're going to put somewhere where the temperature fluctuates, don't put it there. Put it somewhere where you have is
right, like a garage.
Yes, like a garage. But also something that's also important that people don't realize is that if you're storing, even if you have a fancy fridge and you're storing your wine, and you're thinking that one day you're going to be able to resell it because people are talking about the wine industry and you can invest in wine, most collectors will not buy the wine from your fridge. You would have to go to store it at a professional storage facility.
Right. I think it's a tricky thing to ever want to invest in kosher wine. It's an absolute unknown market. So buy it for yourself, enjoy it yourself.
Yes.
It's very tricky.
Sometimes people think about that. They'll ask me, what if I want to invest in wine, what should I do? And I would be like, there's so many factors. And the primary factor is you can't store it yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, the non-kosher world where that really exists in investing in wine, those bottles are being stored in professional facilities. Correct. So that absolutely. I mean, but do this for yourself first before you start investing would be my recommendation.
The chilling of Chardonnay and Rosé before drinking.
So yeah, the general, I think it's an easy way to remember it is that rosé and white wine you typically are going to keep chilled and then take it out of the cold wherever refrigerator or whatever 15 minutes before you drink it. Red wine, the opposite. You generally are going to store it at, it could be at 60 to 70 degrees even. Put it in the fridge for 15 minutes. I think people don't think ever about chilling red wine a little bit. The optimal temperature for red wine is more like 60 degrees, let's say. Not 70 or 72 or 74, whatever your house is at. That's maybe too warm for red wine. not necessarily to store it at, but to drink it at.
Right.
Personally, with white wine, I almost never chill wine. Period. I don't like drinking. I mean, I'll put it this way: good wine, a really good white wine. I don't chill them. I like to. I have them at my cellar temp. I may like put it in the fridge for a few minutes or something like that, but mostly not. I like to taste it the way it's intended to be tasted, and cold mutes flavor.
Yeah.
So you know when it's good to use is for bad wine. It's
Right.
like that. Make it ice cold.
You lose the subtlety of all those
You
flavors that
do.
you really want to taste. You lose them when
You
you chill.
absolutely do.
Yeah.
Like a great Sauvignon Blanc, when you put that, when that's ice cold, it mutes all the nose of it and the flavor of it. So I drink it at the same temperature as red wine for the most part, with the exception of bubbly. That like kind of has to be cold.
Yeah. Or an ice wine.
Or an ice wine, right? Which also really is, yeah, you want that cold too. But
Yeah.
yet not port. Port I would drink at the same temperature as red wine. But yeah, ice wine, absolutely. So
Yeah.
turn is good cold too, like the good,
By the way,
any of those white.
Some of those ice wines are not kosher Pesach for different reasons, so got to be careful with them.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't. I am not familiar with any this year that aren't. The issue, as far as I know, the kosher Pesach is kitnius, and there's a couple of them float around that, and they'll on any of the kosher websites they'll make a big thing at not kosher Pesach.
Right.
But I thought like even
I think the Joyvin Sangria is not kosher Pesach.
One of those sangrias, right?
Yeah.
It's exactly, and I think even one of them that
as well.
I think even one of them that wasn't. I think it was the LV sangria. I think now it is kosher for Pesach. It used to not be because I think they must use like kitnius in it. But
it doesn't make sense to make a kosher wine not kosher Pesach because
100%.
most of kosher wine is sold for Pesach,
as we just discussed, right?
Yes.
So,
but there happens to be, though, you have to be careful. I know, for example, a lot of the Canadian ice wines, a few kosher Canadian ice wines, and I don't know if any of them are kosher Pesach.
So that really,
yeah.
Which one am I thinking of from
the Safona or the Snow Ridge?
Safona is not kosher Pesach.
No.
Wow. I mean, I don't think I've ever had it, but I did not know that.
I'm gonna go the Snow Ridge as well.
I'm gonna go. I have it down in my cellar. I'm gonna go look down there right after we're done. I had no idea of that. Interesting. Yeah. Oh, see, even I'm learning. Even I'm learning.
What about aeration?
So another thing that I really think there's a lot of misunderstanding about aeration. The vast majority of wines do not need aeration, do not need to be decanted. They are meant to drink now. And when I say drink now, I mean also it's pop and pour. Like you pop and pour it. When you get experienced enough with drinking wine, you kind of know when you taste the wine out of the glass right away, right after you pop it and pour it and you taste the wine, that if it needs air, you can generally get the feel for that. But the vast majority of wines do not need air. And now,
actually, I would say if it needs air, it's probably not a good wine.
Well, or it's a really young, big wine. Like, you buy like a brand new Chalk Hill or something like that. That wine needs time to aerate. I mean, those are not meant because of the tannin and everything's got to calm down a little bit. They're not even really meant to drink so much now. But if you're going to, that's a wine you decant. Yeah. But people like decant these wines. I'm like, what are you doing? That you're killing it. You're going to you're taking a risk even that it's going to die within 10 minutes or 15 minutes. So I think sorry?
It probably will die within 10 minutes. You should know that. If you decant your wine, it's not going to last long.
No, I'm almost any wine. And that's I really only ever decant if it's a very young, big wine and I have a big crowd, meaning we're all going to basically drink one glass of it right away. Otherwise, I'll drink it. I'll let it evolve in my glass, and then you see how it changes over the course of one of my 7-hour meals on Shabbos.
I'm excited. I haven't experienced one of these yet.
Yeah, we got to get you here.
Yeah. Okay, we have another question. So thank you, Ezra. That was great. This is from a person named Zachary Jerusalem or Yisachar. He says, good morning. Mostly just wanted to say I've been really enjoying the new podcast, as have we. I live in Cleveland, and I am a newish wine drinker, 3 to 4 years or so, and I find your candor entertaining. Appreciated learning about Brett in your last podcast and the difference between that and the territory notes, both of which I have very limited experience. Random minor question. You said the Matar CB16 is great in drinking well now. Any experience with the 17? I recently acquired a bottle of it. And how is it drinking now, or the more recent vintages are.
Well, I'll let you handle that one since you just had the 16.
So I just had the 16. It's definitely, if you have a Matar CB16, it should be your bottle for the Seder. It's drinking. It's in the perfect window. And
Right.
I'm going to say it's probably not going to last in that window for much longer.
Right. And I would say the case would be the same for the 17. I think those are wines that we had talked about before. They're in that window now that you should Israeli wines, high end Israeli wines like Matar. Those are wines that you want to be in that 5 to 10 year window, or I think it's the perfect time to probably drink a 17 also. Would you agree?
I would say the 17, and probably I just had the 18 not long ago as well at a tasting, and I would say it's entering that window as well. So if it already I saw it entering that window, so I would say the 17 is well into it.
Right. Love the fan mail.
This
Love
is
it.
great. Please keep those emails coming.
Yeah, it's
This
great.
makes us feel like we're important.
I live off of it. I love it. I love all the texts. I love hearing that people are listening to this. It really makes both of us very happy.
Absolutely, and we love it, and we send each other. If you send a message to us,
Right.
we'll send it to one another so that we can both appreciate it, because it really is something special, and it's nice to know that there
Yeah,
is a community. Like there's so many of you and us, and together we're really trying to make the kosher wine world something special. So,
absolutely.
Kenny L'chaim to our first Pesach with this podcast.
I can't wait. And Chaim to you. It should
I
be enjoyable. It
Amen.
should be our last outside of Eretz Yisrael.
And so when we get
Hopefully, we'll get there
together
before.
in Jerusalem, since we're going to say Lashana Haba B'Yushalayim, we'll say Lashana Hazeh B'Yushalayim.
Amen.
And
Amen.
so I'm expecting Cholamod in Jerusalem. You and I were going to do number 6.
Absolutely cannot wait.